Hi, it's Penny here, and this is going to be my wrap up for the month of September. As usual, I am going to do this book battle style, which means I pair up all the books and I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. As well, in September was the Magical Readathon, so the way I'm going to arrange my book battles is I'm going to group them by the different classes that are a part of the Magical Readathon. I will link the Magical Readathon below if you don't know anything about it, but also, if you don't know anything about it, it doesn't matter too much, although it is a really good readathon. Probably the only one I really do anymore. Anyway, that means our first battle is going to be Animal Studies versus Astronomy. So we have Sheets by Brenna Thummler up against Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. Oh, and I guess I should say for the Magical Readathon, I am attempting to become an alchemist, so I had to read quite a lot of books to get my qualification this year, but I did succeed. So firstly, Animal Studies, I only needed to get an O, which is the first level, the Ordinaries, which was a class on hatchlings. So I needed to read a debut book. Initially, I was planning to double up a lot of things for this readathon, but I ended up figuring out a way not to do it. Did I cheat by reading some graphic novels? Yes. Well, it's not cheating. It's not cheating. Anyway, for this one, I read Sheets. So this is a graphic novel about this young girl, or this girl in high school, and her mother has died. So now, while her father is kind of going through things, she's ended up kind of running the family business, which is this laundry. At the same time, we get a little bit of a weird story about this ghost in Ghost Town, and he's not really fitting in. But also in Ghost Town, they all wear sheets. The idea is that if they go into the human world, humans will just think that they're a human dressed up, but they're actually ghosts. And they kind of end up running into each other in this laundry in a way that I guess comes together with a kind of a feel-good message. Also throughout it, I guess there's a lot of parallels being drawn about how this young girl really feels very invisible and how that compares to this ghost boy feeling very invisible. And I can see that it would be a very relatable story for a lot of people, but I was a little bit confused in the beginning, and also I do not think I am the target market for this. So I thought it was cute, I thought it was good, but also, unlike some of the other graphic novels I'm going to talk about in this video, I didn't really love it. I don't think it will particularly stick with me. Then for astronomy class, I also only needed an O where we were studying invisible stars, and the prompt was to read a book where a character has an invisible illness. I think I stretched this a little bit, but what I read is Parable of the Talents. So in this, the main character has hyper-empathy. It's a situation where when she sees other people in pain, she will feel that pain herself, which is especially difficult in the time that she's living, which is kind of like a dystopian future that doesn't seem very futuristic from our current situation, or at least the current situation in America. I will say this was written in the 90s or the late 90s, and there is a lot in this series that feels very prophetic, but I do also constantly remind myself while I'm reading this that it's not because she was necessarily amazing at foretelling the future. It was just that this shit has been happening for a long time. Anyway, this is the second book in the Earthseed duology. So we're following this young girl who has this hyper-empathy, but also she is trying to invent her own religion. In the second book, she's basically kind of built up a bit of a community around her, but then everything turns to shit from there. It's a dystopian, right? What I particularly liked about the second book is we also get the perspective of this woman's daughter from the future, and I really like the way those two stories fit together. Also, this duology is all written in like journal form, which sometimes I found a little bit difficult, like unbelievable that she would write out full scenes in her journal, but I was willing to let that go. I definitely like the second book a lot better, and I also think this would be a really valuable read in our current times, or probably any time, to be honest, because humans are humans. But anyway, if I am battling these two books up against each other, I am going to pick Parable of the Talents just because I do think it's a much better story, but also a much more valuable story. Like, there's a lot of ideas in Parable of the Talents to really dig into. And it's probably not fair to battle it against a graphic novel that, of course, isn't going to do that. Next, we have Restoration versus Demonology. So we have The Wishing Bridge by Olivie Blake up against Rapport by Martha Wells. Both of these are short stories. So Januaries is a short story anthology. The idea... Actually, I have it here. The idea with this is there is 12 short stories, and it starts in the season of spring, which just started here in New Zealand. So I'm going to try and read one short story every month. So in September, I read The Wishing Bridge, where we're following this woman who lives on a bridge. This bridge is a magical bridge, which will essentially grant people wishes, although there's some very specific rules around it. And the bridge just magically moves around the place. If you happen to find it on the night of a full moon, then you can make your wish. But then this guy accidentally finds the bridge and gets talking to her, and he's like, "Don't you exist the rest of the time?" And she's like, I don't. It's a really cool little clever story. There's also like quite a humorous kind of side story about a love triangle and some people making some idiotic wishes relating to that. I thought it was really well written. I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the short stories. I should also say, I already read this before, and I just feel like with short story anthologies, I get too overwhelmed. So that's why I decided to read one short story every month. Oh, and the prompt for the Magical Readathon was unbroken focus tincture is what we were studying. And the prompt was to read a book from a single point of view. Or read something. It doesn't have to be a book. Then for demonology, we were studying impling outbursts. And so we had to read something with an emotion in the title. And I picked up Rapport, which is a new little Murderbot short story set in the world of the Murderbot series. The full title of Rapport is Rapport, Friendship, Solidarity, Communion, and Empathy. Solidarity is an emotion, or at least that's what I'm arguing. So I really love the Murderbot books, and I enjoyed being back in the world. I will note there is no Murderbot in this short story, which was a bit disappointing. It's more of like a little side story telling the story of Art, also known as Asshole Research Transport, telling a little bit of a story with him and his crew when they learn that he's made this friend, Murderbot. So it was interesting to kind of get that little side perspective, but also I don't know that the story adds anything particularly to the world. Like as a standalone story, didn't get much from it. As a little extra piece of Murderbot fun, sure, it was a good time. So if I'm putting these two up against each other, I am actually going to pick The Wishing Bridge. The Wish Bridge? What did I say before? The Wish Bridge. I'm going to pick that as the winner of the battle. Okay, so next we have spells and incantations, and for this I needed to read two books. So we have The Many Deaths of Laila Starr by Ramvi and Filipe Andrade up against The Listeners by Maggie Stiefvater. So firstly, The Many Deaths of Laila Starr. For this class we were studying luck charms, and you had to roll a dice and then read a book that had the corresponding amount of pages, but basically times 100. So I rolled a 1, which I wasn't very prepared for, but that means I needed to read something between 100 and 199 pages. I think this is 128. It's that kind of size graphic novel. And this was a reread for me, but it's a 5-star reread, and I'm really glad to have picked this up again. It is a story about the god of death, but this baby has just been born who's going to invent immortality. So the god of death has lost their job and been put into a mortal body. And they think, well, I'm going to kill that baby and get my job back. Except that instead, every time they kind of encounter this person that's going to invent immortality, they end up dead themselves. And the body they're in is Laila Starr. The art in this is honestly really beautiful. There's lots of really amazing color palettes, and then some really nice single page start of chapters. And as well, the writing in this is amazing. So many really great lines, and it's really looking into how life and death fit together and the experience of death throughout life. It's just a really beautiful book. I cried at the end of it, even though it was a reread. One of my favorite graphic novels out there for sure. Then we have The Listeners by Maggie Stiefvater. So I think this was one of my 5-star predictions for this year. A new release, just released a couple of months ago, I think. My library got it in. I was very excited to get it. I have loved so many things by Maggie Stiefvater before, but this, I picked it up and immediately I thought, what is this? I hated it. The writing was terrible. Really boring. I didn't find any of the sentences interesting. When it tried to be a little bit quirky, it didn't seem at all like Maggie Stiefvater quirky. It seemed more like clunky quirky. and just made things more difficult to understand. The setup is that it's set in World War II, and then America's just gotten involved with the war because of Pearl Harbor, and they've decided to take all the people that they're worried about, like some Nazis, but also just a bunch of people from the countries that are on the other side of the war, and put them into these like luxury hotels. The idea being that if they treat them somewhat well, hopefully Germany and the other countries will treat American prisoners well. But we're mainly following it from the perspective of like the manager of this hotel. But honestly, I did not care about anything that was being set up. And there were a few little topics touched on that the way they were touched on gave me zero confidence that the book was going to deal with any of the like difficult topics that this would clearly be touching on. I had no confidence it was going to deal with it with any kind of sensitivity or like nuance. And I struggled through 3 chapters, and then I just thought, this is not going to get better. There was a little bit of a like magical realism thing in there where the spring water under this hotel has some kind of magical properties, but honestly, couldn't care less. So I DNF'd it after 50 pages. 5-star prediction, favorite author, DNF. I almost can't believe that happened. So if I'm putting these 2 books up against each other, obviously I'm going to pick The Many Deaths of Laila Starr, even though normally I say that rereads can't win the battle, but like I'm certainly not going to put the listeners through to the semi-finals or the final battle, so The Many Deaths of Laila Starr it is. Oh, I forgot to say, the reason why the listeners fit the prompt was it was a book released this year. So it was, but I kind of wish it wasn't. Okay, then I also needed a qualified for law, so I had to read 2 books for law. So we have Assassin of Reality by Marina and Sergey Dyachenko up against, let's call it The Pony Party by Loney M. Setnick. So starting with Assassin of Reality, this is another reread. This is the 2nd book in the Vita Nostra trilogy. Vita Nostra is one of my favorite books ever. We're following this young girl named Sasha. She goes on a beach holiday with her mother where she runs into this man who starts giving her very strange tasks to do. And when she completes the tasks, eventually she earns her way into this Institute of Special Technologies that she didn't want to go to, but now she is. And if they don't do well in their classes, there are quite severe consequences for their loved ones. But everything that they're learning in this school is very abstract and bizarre, and they're kind of like going through a physical transformation as well as perhaps a conceptual transformation. Now, I will admit, the 2nd book, Assassin of Reality, basically Sasha is continuing her schooling, having learned a lot from the 1st book. And it's not as good as the 1st book, but actually on a reread, I did like it more than I did the first time. I think because I've now read Vita Nostra 3 times, and so I'm starting to actually understand what's going on. I definitely did not understand things properly or like fully on the first read. And that's part of what I love about this. So even though I don't think Assassin of Reality is as good as Vita Nostra, if you like weird books, I definitely recommend the series. And the 3rd book has just been translated to English and came out, I think, in June. I'm planning to read it in October, and I'm super hyped for it. Actually, which reminds me to mention the Magical Readathon prompt I was reading this for. So we were studying Forgotten Tongues, and the prompt was to read a translated book. So this was a translated book. Then the 2nd class, we were studying Ancient Post, and the idea is to read a book with a letter or notes on the cover or inside the book. So for this, I read what I'm calling The Pony Party by Loney M. Setnick, because throughout this there are a bunch of like photos and newspaper clippings and letters and that kind of thing. What this actually is, it's a weird book, because if you look this book up, you will find a little bit of like confusion about what it even is, because if you take off the dust jacket, it's actually reversible, and it is in fact Lemony Snicket, an unauthorized autobiography. Lemony Snicket, of course, being the author, or so-called author, of the Series of Unfortunate Events books, which of course this cover is very reminiscent of. And it's kind of quite a weird story. I love the introduction to it. It was written in that very, I don't know, weird, whimsical, dark, I don't know what it is, that lovely writing style that there is in A Series of Unfortunate Events, where it's really playing with the writing. But in the end, I don't actually think that this is that good a book standing on its own. I think it would be really great to have as supplementary material while you're rereading a series of unfortunate events, because it kind of gives you some background information to what the adults were up to while the Baudelaire orphans in the series of unfortunate events are doing all their shenanigans and figuring things out. It is very weird, very humorous. I enjoyed reading it, but I do think I would rather read it while I was rereading a series of unfortunate events, which I will definitely do at some point, so I will be keeping this for whenever that happens. So if I am putting these two books up against each other, because this is just supplementary material, I'm going to pick Assassin of Reality, even though once again, it's a reread. It's not supposed to be up for the final battle, but I don't care. I'm breaking all the rules today. I'm just doing whatever I want. Okay, for our next battle, we have the Alchemy class, where, of course, wanting to be an alchemist, I had to read 3 books to get distinguished in the class. So we have Infinity Gate by Emma Carey, up against Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Marillier, up against Fellside by Emma Carey. So firstly, we were studying Liquid Sunlight, and I needed to read a book with the sun on the cover, or a sun, I guess. I'm looking closely at this now, and I think there might even be multiple suns on the cover. Debatable. So for this, I read Infinity Gate by Emma Carey. I have read and loved a lot of things by Emma Carey. This one involves multiverse stuff, and I particularly love multiverse stories. This one, actually, the very first half of it, I loved. This is another 5-star prediction for me, and the first half definitely delivered on that. The second half, I still liked it, but it had some pacing problems, I think. And I think as well in the second half, I really started overthinking some of the logistics of multiverse travel and having some difficulty with it in terms of logic, but mostly I could put that aside. I know not to think about those things too much in a story like this. Basically, in the beginning of this, we're following this scientist. As the apocalypse is basically going down, she discovers multiverse travel. And while she's exploring different universes or different multiverses, I never know the right way to phrase it. Anyway, while she's exploring, she accidentally enters a universe that is covered or governed by the Pandominion, and that kind of leads to some bigger difficulties. The book does move between different perspectives, which wasn't my favorite. So we get the beginning of the book from the scientist's perspective, then we get kind of this guy who's not really having a very great life that she meets up with, and then we also get the perspective of this like rabbit girl who lives in the Pandominion. And there's an AI element to this as well, where the Pandominion has run into some worlds that are run by machines, and that's kind of ramping up into a big conflict as well. So a lot of really great ideas in this. I do really love Emma Carey's writing and kind of some of things he says about humanity and psychology and people and life. I really love it. But the ending, the pacing, there was a big battle that took a long time and I didn't love it. But I did really like the way the ending set things up for the second book. It's only a duology and I will be finishing it off in October. I still really love this. It just wasn't quite the 5-star prediction I was hoping for. It didn't quite deliver on the beginning of the book. Okay, then for the second class in alchemy, we were studying blossom properties. And for this, I needed to read a book where the cover was in my birth flower color. I'm still not sure if I'm cheating with this one, but I'm going with it. My initial cheat was that there are some little pinky flowers down here. So I was born in April, which means my birth flower is either a daisy or it can also be peonies, which these could almost, not really, but almost be peonies. But actually, I realized her dress is white and the text is yellow like a daisy. Anyway, regardless, I'm going to counter it. I don't care if it's cheating. So anyway, Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Marillier. This is the first book in a trilogy. I have read some other stuff by Juliet Marillier and really loved it, especially the first couple of books in the Seven Waters series. And so I wanted to pick up some more by her, even though she kind of writes like fantasy romance, which isn't normally my style. But I think the way that she does it is so great. This one in particular, the romance is so slow burn that in this first book, like nothing happens. Well, I guess there is a secondary romance where some things happen, but also not really. We are following Blackthorn. Initially, when we meet her, she is in prison, and she basically ends up making a deal with the Fae where he will help her escape if she then goes away for 7 years. And during that time, anytime anyone asks her for help, she has to provide that help as best as she can. So she ends up kind of finding a place as a healer in this kingdom where there's also this prince, and he has this princess coming that he's betrothed to, and he is in love with her based on the letters they've been writing to each other. But when she shows up, she doesn't really match the letters, and there's a bit of a magical mystery around that, which honestly 100% predictable, but so emotionally satisfying. I was really surprised how much I love that part of the story, but I also liked Blackthorn and Grimm. So along with Blackthorn escaping from this prison, she also has this guy Grimm escape with her, and he's like this big tough guy, but honestly just the sweetest, and they end up kind of forming a partnership, and the whole story is just about them learning to trust each other. Like, I think they're in-game, but in this you couldn't necessarily tell, but I love both of them and their friendship. So great. And I cannot wait to continue this trilogy now. Then lastly, we were studying flavor enhancing tricks, and the prompt was to read an auto by author. So I went with Emma Carey because at this point I've loved so much that I think I will try anything he writes. It's kind of ironic though that for this prompt I picked one of his backlist books, and it was probably my least favorite of his that I've read. So Fellside, we're following this woman who is a drug addict, and she accidentally burns her house down and someone dies as a result, and she ends up being put away for murder, even though actually she doesn't really remember properly what happened. Then when she's in the prison, she kind of starts hearing voices, and there's this weird kind of ghost and dreams part of the story, which I did find very interesting. Somewhat predictable, but quite interesting. Unfortunately, a lot of the story also focused on these other characters in the prison involved in the drug distribution going on in the prison and all those illegal shenanigans and a lot of violence, and it wasn't necessarily badly written. It just wasn't interesting to me, and it was particularly frustrating because other parts of the story were more interesting. And I think maybe if the story had come together in some kind of amazing way, it would have been worth it. Like, in the end, you can see how that part of the story is relevant to the other part of the story, but it's just not enough to make it worth reading something that just wasn't interesting. So I liked it. Like, I still think Mike Carey had some elements of the story that were really good at like shining a light on humanity and psychology. Like, there were some nice ideas in there, but the overall story wasn't really something I loved. So if we are putting these three books up against each other, obviously I'm going to take away Fellside first because I like that the least. Before I read either of these, I would have expected this to be the winner of the battle, but because of the pacing problems I had with the second half of the book, like based on the beginning of the book, this one wins, but based on the full experience, I think I have to pick Dreamer's Pool, and I just feel so much more emotionally connected to this book. Maybe Infinity Gate had some better ideas, but Dreamer's Pool... I really love Blackthorn and Grimm. Oh, and also, I read this via audiobook, and the audiobook experience was really great, so I would recommend the audiobook for this, and I really love Blackthorn and Grimm. I really hope I love the rest of the trilogy as well. Okay, then my last class for the Magical Readathon was Inscription, where I also needed to read 3 books. So we have Cucumber Quest Volume 2, The Ripple Kingdom by Gigi, up against Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, up against Cucumber Quest The Melody Kingdom by Gigi. Okay, so for the first Inscription class, we were studying Magic of Primes, and you had to read a book where there was a prime number of letters in the title. I was actually hoping to read Geist for this prompt. 5 letters is a prime number, but I'm currently a third of the way through this on the 1st of October, so I had to work around it, and instead I picked up a graphic novel. The second volume of Cucumber Quest, I'd reread the first volume in August, and this was a reread again for the rest of the series. This is just a really cute little graphic novel series about these rabbits trying to save the world from the Nightmare Knight, who every 5,000 years comes back and causes troubles. It's really lovely art and as well like really humorous. It's kind of written for a younger age market, but something about the jokes just makes me really happy, and the art, the colors are so beautiful. I don't know, I have a really great time with this series. I do always need to remember to mention that the series is not finished and has been on hiatus since 2019, so probably will never be finished, but I really love it anyway. Oh, and I should say, I'm hacking this really to fit into the prompt because Cucumber Quest has a prime number of letters in the title, 13. The full title or the title of the volume, not really, but I don't care. Whenever I talk about this series, I just call it Cucumber Quest, so that's what we're going with. Then the next class was archiving, and we had to read a book with a vertical spine title. I have this little copy I got for $1 from a local book fair of Frankenstein, and it has some pictures in it as well. And I had read Frankenstein about 10 years ago, so I was planning to reread it anyway, so this is what I picked up for this prompt. I realized when I read this that last time I read this 10 years ago, I gave it 2 stars. I definitely had a better reading experience going into it, knowing what to expect. But also I think I've read a lot more in the last 10 years, and so I struggled a lot less with the older writing style. I definitely still felt a lot of frustration about both Victor Frankenstein and his monster. Their long emotional rambles and the way that they react to anything going wrong, quite overdramatic, but I know that is the style of the book. And I did think at times Mary Shelley just did like a wonderful job of describing those emotions. Like, I think the descriptions in this book were my favorite thing. So I'm not really a classics kind of girl, but I am a fantasy girl, which I think this fits into, even though it's usually classified as horror. Or like gothic horror. Anyway, I won't say that everyone should read Frankenstein because obviously me 10 years ago wasn't ready for it. But I do still think there's a lot in here that has value today. And also reading this, I could see a lot of like the beginnings of a lot of things we still get in modern day, like thrillers and horror. So I'm glad I reread this. I definitely had a different perspective of it. Then lastly, we were studying animal taming runes. So we had to read a book with an animal on the cover. And for this, I went for volume 3 of Cucumber Quest. You do have to zoom in, but there are some little rabbits on the cover. Or rabbit people, but rabbit people still count as animals, I'm sure of it. Actually, people are animals too, so even a person on the cover could have been argued to meet this prompt. But anyway, I already talked about Cucumber Quest. I do think volume 3 is not the strongest in the series. The jokes weren't quite as good. The way the story was told was a little bit harder to follow. I think as well it has a kind of a different color palette for some parts of it that I didn't love as much. So not my favorite, but still really good. I still love the part that it plays in the bigger Cucumber Quest. So if I'm putting these 3 books up against each other, honestly, all 3 of these were rereads, so technically none of them can win the battle. And I was also just thinking about Frankenstein and volume 2 of Cucumber Quest both kind of have this like monsters perspective, because in volume 2 you're getting the Splash Master, this octopus guy, you're getting his perspective a little bit, and he's kind of dumb, but he's really trying. And he's kind of cute, and I kind of love him even though he's the bad guy, you know? And even though I did really like Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein is a really annoying guy, and the story definitely does ramble all over the place. So I think actually I'm going to pick volume 2 of Cucumber Quest as the winner of this battle. It's just the one I had the most fun with, the one I enjoyed the most. So that's why we're going to pick it. So that is all the books that I read for the Magical Readathon, but I did actually read 2 books that I couldn't fit into any of the prompts, which does make me feel better about covering some of the prompts with graphic novels, because these other 2 books I read weren't graphic novels. So I still read like plenty of books, like a lot of books in the month. So I definitely think I earned my alchemist qualification. So the other 2 books I read was Age of Death by Michael J. Sullivan and Autonomous by Annalee Newitz. So starting with Age of Death, this is the 5th book in the Legends of the First Empire, which is a 6-book series, and also part of Michael J. Sullivan's bigger Ryria series. In this one, we're following a part of the history of the world where humans are still living like quite primitively, technologically, and they they view the elves of the world as gods. They think they can't die. But then at the beginning of the series, a human accidentally kills an elf and they kind of realize, hey, these guys aren't gods after all. And then there's kind of a big war begins. In this particular book, some of the characters that we're following are in the afterlife. I thought I was going to love that part of the story. I thought I was going to love learning more about the gods of the world, which we've had so much of that story hinted to us. And having read some of the earlier books in the world that are actually set further on in history, you know that in the future, their history and their understanding of the gods is definitely not quite right. So I was looking forward to learning a lot more about that in this, but it kept teasing me. It kept giving me a little bit of information and then not quite going all the way, and I got very annoyed about it. And I also just think the part in the afterlife, like, it didn't have enough logic for me. I either needed more logic or more weirdness, but it was somehow in the middle, which I found a little bit unsatisfying. There is also another part where one of the humans is now a prisoner of the elves, and that part I wish we had got more of. That part I really loved. And then I think, honestly, there was maybe like 3 chapters of the human war camp. Almost nothing happened there. So overall, even though I liked a lot of this, I came out of it feeling somewhat unsatisfied, but also very hopeful for the 6th book. So let's hope. Then we have Autonomous by Annalene Newitz. So in this story, we are following, I guess primarily we're following this pharmaceutical pirate. She reverse engineers drugs so that she can give them to people who need them for free or for a cheap price. And then she's also reverse engineered this particular drug that makes people enjoy work. And that one she's selling basically to fund the rest of her endeavors. But then she finds out that it has a side effect which basically makes people so addicted to their work that they can't stop doing it. And they get in like medical difficulties because they're no longer taking care of themselves. All they want to do is work. And so she decides she needs to try and do something about that. At the same time, we're also following this robot who's been paired up with this human, and they're going to go off and try and investigate the source of these pirated drugs, mainly because the company that has made these drugs doesn't want it getting out that it's got these terrible side effects. And it was actually the robot story that especially let this book down for me. Even though the main setup of the book is about this pharmaceutical piracy, a lot of the focus of the book is really trying, I think, to draw parallels between these robots not having full autonomy, or like them being programmed with the desire to do their job well, or in this particular robot's case, to keep his partner happy. It's trying to draw parallels between that and like actual slavery, because in this world there is also actual slavery, and one of the characters we get to meet has basically been forced to do sexual things as a slave. As well, there's this weird sexual thing that goes on with the robot and his partner. And when it was introduced and the way it was introduced, the whole time I was waiting for the robot to figure out that his partner was not a good guy. And that's not the direction it went in. And then as well, this pharmaceutical pirate ends up kind of taking care of this young slave boy. And also there's some sexual interactions which weren't dealt with any kind of nuance or sensitivity. And I just really ended up hating the whole book because of that. As well, the whole aspect of the story about pharmaceutical piracy, boring, predictable, didn't really say anything meaningful. I don't know, I just ended up being very let down by Autonomous. So if we're putting these 2 books up against each other, obviously I'm going to pick Age of Death. Okay, now I'll do some semi-final battles to decide the best book of the month. I will note though that a lot of the books I have here as winner of the battles so far rereads. So if I take all of those out, we don't need to do quite as many semi-final battles. So firstly, we'll have The Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler up against The Wishbridge by Olivie Blake. I am going to take away The Wishbridge just because it's a short story, even though it was very well written and I liked it. It's not that deep, it doesn't have that much to it, which is the opposite of Parable of the Talents. Even though I didn't love everything about the way the Parable of the Talents was written, it still had a lot of really solid ideas in there to think about. And of course, it is very relevant to our current world, so I definitely recommend it. And then we'll have Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Marillier up against Age of Death by Michael J. Sullivan. And I'm going to pick Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Marillier, even though in some ways it was kind of predictable. I just felt so much more emotionally invested and in the end so much more satisfied. Like, even if I knew what was going to happen at the end, it just got me so emotionally engaged that when it came out the way it did, I was so satisfied. So that means to pick the best book of the month, we have The Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler up against Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Marillier. Honestly, I recommend people read both of these books, and both of them are best in very different ways. I definitely love the writing and felt much more emotionally invested in Dreamer's Pool, but then Parable of the Talents has like so many more ideas in it and so much more to think about. So I guess like if you're looking for escapism, I recommend Dreamer's Pool. If you're looking for something to maybe help you contextualize and think about the world, then Parable of the Talents. But if I have to pick a best book of the month, I think for me, I'm going to pick Dreamer's Pool. I just really enjoyed that reading experience. I had a great time with it. I thought it was so well written. I loved it. So that'll be the best book of the month. Let me know what the best book you read was in the month of September. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.